Last time, we ended with the passing of Emperor Wen, who died a peaceful death after a relatively long and stable reign. This time, rather than picking up with the accession of his son, Emperor Jing, I'd like to turn the clock back about 40 years to 195 BC, the 12th and last year of Gaozu's reign. If you remember, during this year, the king of Huainan, Qingbu, revolted, and before he was defeated, he managed to conquer the kingdom of Jing and kill its ruler, Liu Jia. After Qing's revolt was put down, Gaozu decided to reconstitute the region that had been Jing as the kingdom of Wu. Wu was situated around the mouth of the Yangtze River, the region of modern-day Shanghai. It was far removed from the seat of imperial power in Guangzhou and bordered with non-Chinese tribal peoples to the south. Perhaps because of these reasons, Gaozu thought that his own sons, most of whom were still children, were not ready to rule the new kingdom. So, he chose his nephew, Liu Pi, who was in his early 20s. The young man had been a general in the campaign against Qingbu. We are told that after Liu Pi received his royal seals, Gaozu summoned him and examined his face. Apparently, Gaozu remarked that Liu Pi looked like the sort of person who would be disloyal, and predicted that he might cause trouble some decades hence. Gaozu said to Liu Pi with a pat on the back, quote, "Remember that the empire belongs to the Liu clan, and that we are all of the same family. Better to be cautious and not revolt." Liu Pi replied with a bow that he would never dare such a thing, but Gaozu secretly regretted choosing him for the job. When we see how Liu Pi's reign panned out and came to an end, the exchange seems like such obvious foreshadowing that I can't help but suspect that it became part of the story after the fact. However, Gaozu does seem to have been a pretty charismatic, people person sort of guy, so maybe he was actually a pretty good judge of character. Shortly after Liu Pi's enthronement, Gaozu died, and Liu Pi concentrated on governing his kingdom, like the other feudal lords. In the early years of his reign, it seems he remained interested in the Han dynasty as a whole and what was going on in Chang'an. He visited the capital in 190, and again in 188. However, he soon grew to be more and more focused on his own territory, turning away from the broader concerns of the dynasty. Thus, he was uninvolved with the various intrigues and eventual coup during the years of Empress Liu. Although Wu was a remote area, and compared to the fertile plains of the Yellow River, the Yangtze offered poor farming. The kingdom had two resources that Liu Pi took advantage of. Firstly, it had a coastline, which meant he could conduct salt extraction. Apart from being a dietary necessity, salt was also vital for preserving food. In China, there were only a few places that were ideal for producing salt, so if you could make a lot of it, you could become very wealthy. The other major resource was its copper ore, which Liu Pi mined to mint coins. Under Qin, the government had held a monopoly on minting, but Gaozu had abandoned this policy and opened it up to anyone who could afford to have a crack at it. Historian Nishijima Sadao speculates that following the turmoil of the revolution against Qin and the Civil War, this move was necessary to make up for a coin shortage. During the reign of Empress Liu, in 186, the government monopolized minting again, only for it to be opened up by Wendi in 175, albeit with more control over private mints. We are not told when Liu Pi started his minting operation, so it's not clear whether it would have been legal or illegal when he began. However, it was something that he came under a lot of criticism for eventually. With the resources of copper and salt at his disposal, according to the records, Liu Pi eventually came to, quote, rival the wealth of the Son of Heaven. Liu Pi seems to have been content to rule his kingdom for about 2 decades, remaining somewhat disinterested in, but not disloyal to, the Han emperors. However, during the reign of Wendi, something happened which deeply offended him. His son Liu Xian, the heir apparent to the throne of Wu, went to Chang'an. While there, he played Liu Bo, an ancient board game, with Liu Qi, the heir apparent. The two got into a fight over the rules of the game, and things escalated quickly. Sima Qian describes Liu Xian as, quote, overbearing, and Liu Qi no doubt felt that Xian, merely a prince of a vassal kingdom, was disrespecting him, the prince of the empire. In anger, Qi picked up the game board and struck Xian over the head with it, killing him. The death of his son upset Liu Pi greatly, and he was likely rankled that Liu Qi got off without punishment. He felt even more insulted when Xian's body was sent back to Wu for burial. Echoing the words that Gaozu had supposedly said when Pi was made king, he declared, quote, "The whole empire belongs to the same Liu clan. If one of our family dies in Chang'an, he should be buried in Chang'an. What reason is there to bring him here for burial?" Henceforth, he refused to travel to Chang'an, and when Wendi later summoned him to pay homage, he pretended that he was sick and unable to go. Wendi started to arrest and interrogate envoys from Wu to find out what was going on. Refusing an emperor's request to come to Chang'an was considered a sign of treasonous intentions. Liu Bei became fearful that he would be punished, and began thinking that he might have to do something drastic. However, when the truth came to light, Wendi, exhibiting his famous virtue, forgave Pi and sent him a stool and a cane, gifts that were usually given to honour aged officials. This put Pi at ease. However, the murder of his son was not something he could easily forgive. He began to build up his kingdom's strength. His copper and salt operations were so profitable that eventually he could do away with the poll tax, winning the support of his people, and he used the wealth to attract talents to his kingdom. He offered refuge to fugitives and criminals from elsewhere in the empire, and created strong ties with the barbarian Yue peoples on his southern border. To the elite in Chang'an, who already viewed the culture of the Yangtze-based Chinese as weird and inferior, the court of Wu began to look like a crooked, motley bunch indeed. However, Wendi did not want to take any active moves to curtail Pi's rising strength. The most he did was appoint a new chancellor for the kingdom of Wu, a man called Yuan. Yuan, who had been part of the court in Chang'an, had admonished Wendi himself on a few occasions. For instance, he warned Wendi against riding in his carriage at dangerous speeds, and against favouring one of his concubines over his main wife. Perhaps Wendi hoped that Yuan could correct Liu Pei's behaviour, in the same way that Yuan had corrected Wendi's own. However, Yuan's nephew warned him that Liu Pei would be a more dangerous master compared to the humble Emperor Wen. He said, quote, "Liu Pei, the king of Wu, has for a long time grown more overbearing each day, and his kingdom is guilty of numerous irregularities. But if now you should attempt to expose him and bring order, he would either send some slanderous report to the emperor about you, or dispatch you at once with the point of a sword. The kingdom of Wu lies in the south, a damp, swampy region. You must take care to drink and eat your daily fill, and not worry yourself about other things. From time to time you may urge the king not to revolt, and that is all. If you do this, you may be fortunate enough to escape harm." Yuan followed his nephew's advice, and kept his head low while he was in Wu. Eventually, he was allowed to return to Chang'an. For the remainder of Wendi's reign, at least, Liu Pei would be left well enough alone. But of course, Wendi could not live forever, and he apparently could not even outlive his older cousin. The emperor died in 156 BC, and Liu Qi, the man who had killed Liu Pei's son, ascended to the throne. He is known by his posthumous name, Xiaojing Huangdi, filial and decisive August Emperor, Jingdi for short. Long-standing grudges weren't the only problem that the accession of Jingdi presented to Liu Pei. A more immediate problem was created by Jingdi's promotion of Chao Cuo. Chao Cuo had been the Grand Councillor of the palace under Wendi, and he had advised a hawkish stance towards the feudal kingdoms to curtail their power. In the episode on Wendi, we talked about Jia Yi and his subtle solution to the problem of the vassal kingdoms, to, quote, while copiously establishing feudal lords, lessen their individual strengths. Chao Cuo's strategy was more forceful. He recommended that the central government outright confiscate territory from the vassal kingdoms. Though Wendi had recognised Chao as a talented man, he did not take up his advice in regards to the kingdoms. Jingdi, on the other hand, even before he had become emperor, was a fan of Chao Cuo's ideas. Once Jingdi was on the throne, Chao Cuo found himself on the up. Before the first year was out, he had been promoted to the office of Imperial Councillor, one of the highest ministers of government, second only to the Chancellor. Chao Cuo was already unpopular amongst other men of the court because of his stance on the vassal kingdoms. The favour he enjoyed from Jingdi only increased his enemies' loathing of him. Before Chao became Imperial Councillor, the Chancellor, Shentu Jia, even tried to have him executed on a trumped-up charge of defacing the temple of Gaozu. Chao Cuo wasn't above this sort of petty intrigue either. He and Yuan were bitter enemies for some reason, and they could not bear to even be in the same room. After Chao became imperial councillor, he had Yuan Ang convicted of accepting bribes from Liu Pe while he had been Chancellor of Wu, and Yuan was demoted to the rank of commoner. Despite Chao's unpopularity though, Jingdi still respected him and was soon putting his advice into practice. Now, in a way, this actually helped Liu Pe out. Chao Cuo's policy wasn't just directed against the kingdom of Wu, but at all the vassal kingdoms. In the second year, 155 BC, the king of Zhao was accused of some crimes and punished by having some of his territory confiscated. The same thing was done to the king of Jiaxi, who was selling noble titles illegally. Seeing this happen made several of the kings suspicious and fearful of the Han government, giving P a number of potential allies should he decide to revolt. Historian Michael Lowe points out that by this point in Han history, there were two other key factors which inclined the kings towards independence. Firstly, a number of the kingdoms, such as Wu, were large and rich enough to be self-sustaining. The relationship with the Han court, especially the annual homage that the kings had to pay, was, from their perspective, an unnecessary financial burden. Secondly, the kings themselves were now more distantly related to the emperor than had been the case earlier on. Gaozu had made his sons kings. This meant that during Huidi's reign, the emperor and many of the kings had been brothers. But as these men died, and successive generations took their thrones, the family ties between the emperor and the kings grew weaker. The family relationship between them was now something more of a formality than a natural affection from growing up together. Now it's true that when Jingdi came to the throne, some of the kings were more closely related to him. After all, Wendi had made his own sons kings. Liu Wu, the king of Liang, was Jingdi's brother, and Liu Deng, the king of Dai, was his nephew. But these are the exceptions that prove the rule, because neither Liang nor Dai took part in the imminent revolt. Liu Pe was quick to take advantage of the aggrieved kings. He sent an envoy to Liu Ang, the king of Jiaxi. Now, not only had Liu Ang lost territory because of Chao Cuo, but he was also considered a capable soldier, feared by the other kings in the region of Qi. If you remember from last episode, Wendi had broken up the powerful feudatory of Qi into a number of smaller kingdoms. Most of them were ruled by sons, if not grandsons, of Liu Fei, the original king of Qi. Now, apart from the general grievances described above, these kings of Qi had another reason to be dissatisfied with the Imperium. You see, the sons of Liu Fei had played a major role in the coup against the Liu family. Liu Zhang had sparked the coup in Chang'an, while his brother, Liu Xiang, who had been king of Qi at the time, had raised his arms in order to fight the Liu forces. They had hoped that Liu Xiang would be chosen as the next emperor in the aftermath of the coup, but instead he had been passed over in favour of Liu Heng, who became Wendi. By the reign of Jingdi, both Liu Zhang and Liu Xiang had died. However, some of the other sons of Liu Fei still held on to the thought of what might have been had their brother become emperor. Liu Pei's envoy scared Liu Ang with the idea that the Han government, having already taken away one of his provinces, would eventually consume his old kingdom. He said, quote, "After the husk has been licked away, the kernel will be eaten up." When the envoy suggested the idea of revolt, Liu Ang was reluctant to betray the emperor. The envoy sold the idea by portraying it as a campaign for the benefit of China as a whole. Jingdi was not himself a bad emperor, but had fallen under the influence of evil ministers, particularly Chao Cuo. He pointed to divine portents, a comet, and plagues of locusts, which signified that heaven and earth were out of accord, and the time might be right to usurp the emperor. He said, quote, "This is an opportunity which comes only once in 10,000 generations, a time of grief and trouble which will bring forth a true sage." Liu Ang was convinced and committed his kingdom to joining Liu Pe in a revolt. However, Liu Pe, daunted by the enormity of the plot they were undertaking, wanted to be certain, so he travelled to Jiaxi himself and confirmed the alliance. Liu Ang was also able to get 5 of the other 6 kings of Qi to pledge their support as well. The 6th, the king of Chengyang, either refused to join the plot, or the others suspected that he was too loyal to the Han government to risk letting him in on it. From now on, I'll call Liu Ang and the kings of Qi who joined him the Shandong kings. While the Shandong kingdoms were making their plans, Liu Pe also sought for more allies. It seems that he made an agreement with the king of Chu, and perhaps with the king of Zhao, but the records does not contain the stories of how these pacts were made. Now you might be wondering if Chao Tzuo was a bit of an idiot for confiscating the lands and provoking the kings into this plot. However, historian Michael Lowe speculates whether this might have been his intention all along. Chao Tzuo saw a revolt, at least a revolt by Liu Bei, as inevitable, and thought it would be better to deal with sooner rather than later. He advised Jingdi to confiscate some of Liu Bei's land, and said, quote, "Now, whether you reduce his territory or not, he is bound to revolt. But if you take away part of his territory, the revolt will come quickly and its effect will be slight. But if you do not reduce his territory, then the revolt will be delayed until later, and will be a much more serious affair." So, with the plotters ready to rebel, all that was left was for the Han government to poke the bee's nest. I wonder if Liu Bei wanted to wait until there was some provocation he could point to as his casus belli, so that the other kings, who were not part of the revolt, might at least hesitate before assisting the Han government in fighting back. That provocation came in the first month of the third year, spring 154 BC, when, at the behest of Chao Tzuo, Jingdi confiscated territory from Liu Bei and Liu Wu, the king of Chu. Liu Wu was accused of failing to remain celibate during the mourning period for Empress Dowager Bo, Wendi's mother who had died the previous summer. We are not told the official charge against Liu Bei, or if there was one, but it was probably justified as punishment for his minting activities and his sheltering of fugitives. When news of the confiscation orders reached the kingdoms, they began their rebellion in a brutal manner. All the Han government officials stationed in Wu and Jiaoxi, P and Ang's kingdoms, were executed in a single day. The other road kingdoms followed suit. With so many kingdoms declaring themselves in blood, the Han dynasty now faced the largest revolt it had ever seen. When he arranged his army, P made it clear that he was throwing everything into the cause. He was 62, and his youngest son, who would be leading soldiers, was 14. Therefore, he conscripted all men in the kingdom of Wu between the ages of 14 and 62. He had raised an army of allegedly 200,000 men. He also sent envoys to two barbarian kingdoms in the southeast, Minyue and Dongor, asking if they would help him. He marched from his capital Guangling north to the Huai River, where he joined with the forces of Chu. There, he made a proclamation to the whole empire, announcing the revolt and describing his strategy. Now, it might seem ill-advised to make such a proclamation, but it was necessary. You see, Liu Bei was asking several of the other kings, not just the ones he had already plotted with, to join his cause. The proclamation is an interesting one. If he genuinely hoped that this was how the war was going to go, he was being wildly optimistic. On the other hand, he might have intentionally overstated his strength, in order to convince the other kings that joining the revolt was a good bet. He addressed the letter not just to the kings who had already agreed to revolt, but to the kings of Huainan, Hengshan, and Lujiang, and to the sons of the late king of Changsha, who he hoped would join him. Now, he had some reason to think that the kings of Huainan, Hengshan, and Lujiang might be inclined to revolt. They were the sons of Liu Chang, the king of Huainan, who had been demoted by Wendi, and had died while being transported on his way to exile. According to Liu Bei, they had, quote, scarcely had the heart to bathe or wash their hair for over 10 years, so consumed are they by anger. The unnamed sons of the late king of Changsha are a bit of an interesting story. Changsha, the kingdom that Gaozu had given to his follower Wu Hui, was the only non-Liu family kingdom that had survived the reign of Gaozu. It had seen several kings of the Wu family, who had basically kept their kingdom by never doing anything to upset the reigning emperor. Hence the records doesn't contain much information about what was going on in Changsha during this period. The Wu line came to an end when its fifth king, Wu Chan, died in 157, the same year as Wendi. He left no heirs, which is why the kingdom was abolished for a brief period, and leaves me asking who exactly these sons were, because they evidently weren't his. My guess is that Liu Bei was addressing some more removed members of the Wu line, who still held some influence in the region of Changsha, perhaps as marquises. Now, the reason he might have thought they would be upset enough with the Han to join the revolt is because the kingdom of Changsha had actually been reconstituted by Jingdi, but had not been given to a member of the Wu family. Instead, it was given to one of Jingdi's sons, Liu Fa. Liu Pe marketed the rebellion as a righteous cause for the sake of China and for the restoration of the order set by Gaozu. He was careful not to blame Jingdi for anything more malicious than ineptitude, but instead attacked his advisors. He said, quote, "Because there are traitorous ministers in the Han court who, though they have done no service to the empire, unrightfully seize the lands of the feudal lords, who arrest and question our envoys and make it their sole concern to inflict insult and injury, who do not treat the feudal lords with the proper respect, although they are flesh and blood of the imperial clan of Liu, but thrust aside the ministers who have won merit under the former emperor and replace them with evil men, who bring chaos to the empire and endanger the sacred altars of the dynasty, and because the emperor, in ill health and intent upon his own well-being, is unable to perceive the true state of affairs, I propose to call out my troops to punish the evildoers." The plan was for a multi-pronged attack. The kingdoms of Wu and Chu, and hopefully Huainan, Hangshen, and Liujiang, which were all roughly in the southeastern corner of China, were to join their armies and take Xinjiang, the city in the centre of China, on the Yellow River, which had been so important in the war between Liu Bang and Xiang Yu. The great owl granary near the city was going to be of vital strategic importance to the rebels. While Wu was a rich kingdom, having plenty of money did not mean guaranteed access to food in wartime. Liu Wang was to lead the Shandong kings on the peninsula north of Wu and Chu, and strike from there. They were to either advance into Guangzhong through the Linjin Pass, which I believe was to the north of the more famous Hanyu Pass, or to rendezvous with Pei's forces at Luoyang, the old Zhou capital, a little further west from Xinjiang along the Yellow River. The kingdom of Zhao, north of the Yellow River and the closest to Chang'an, was a third front. According to Liu Pe, the king of Zhao had already made a pact with the king of Yan, the most northeasterly kingdom, as well as with the Xiongnu. Together, they were to attack the other kingdom of the north, Dai, which was ruled by Jingdi's nephew, and then they were to enter Guangzhong from the north, through the Xiao Pass. As for the sons of the late king of Changsha, they were to unite with the Nanyue barbarians to the south, and take regions to the south of the capital. Perhaps the most incredible parts of the letter are Liu Pe's boast of his own kingdom's strength and wealth. He claimed to have an army of 500,000 trained men ready, with 300,000 Yue barbarians well on the way. This part of the letter is what makes me think P was deliberately exaggerating. An army of 800,000 is larger than the largest army that was ever claimed to be fielded during the Warring States period. Moreover, we are already told that P had raised a mere 200,000, and even that number is dubious. As for the Yue, not only is the number of 300,000 too big, but P reported that he had received the unanimous support of the Yue chieftains. In fact, only the king of Dongor had agreed to help. P also claimed that he would be able to finance the entire rebellion, not just his own army, but those of all the other kings. He said that he had been spending the last 30 years economizing, accumulating cash and grain and weapons, and had stockpiles of funds all throughout the empire. Thus, he said, quote, "The kings may make use of my funds day and night, and there will still be no fear of exhausting them." It seems that he thought the best use for his money was to reward meritorious soldiers and generals, and he provided a detailed list of the sorts of prizes a man could expect for certain achievements. To us, this might seem like a weird thing to focus on. I mean, sure, it's nice to reward feats of bravery, but was it really instrumental to winning a war? But I think what P was going for was to get the attention of Han lords and generals who might be willing to desert. If you remember in the uprising against Qin, Xiang Yu had been able to flip the chief Qin commander, Zhang Han, by promising him his own kingdom after the fighting was done. P said that he would reward men who had already received fiefs and titles from the Han government, and specified, quote, "Grants of fiefs and money shall be twice those prescribed by the usual Han laws." I think this shows he was trying to beat the Han government in what he could materially give to his followers. Now, I can't say for certain whether P could afford to spend all this money or not. While we are told he was wealthy, we don't know exactly how wealthy, and neither do we know exactly how much a campaign like this would cost. But I think it's safe to say that given his exaggerations of his manpower, he was probably also rounding upwards while counting his coins. If P was genuinely counting on all the men he addressed in the letter to actually join the revolt, then his war plan took a serious knock right from the beginning. Neither the kings of Heng Shan, Lu Jiang, or the sons of the late king of Changsha took up arms, leaving just the forces of Wu and Chu in the southeast, and no attack on Guangzhong from the south. The king of Huainan, Liu An, did actually want to revolt, however he was prevented from doing so by his chancellor. Unfortunately, the records doesn't go into much detail about it, but basically the chancellor offered to lead the army of Huainan to join the rebels, but once Liu An handed over command, the chancellor refused to march them out of the capital, and waited for reinforcements from Chang'an to arrive. Transferring command to the chancellor seems to have been a bit of a lapse on behalf of Liu An, given that the chancellors of the kingdoms were appointed by the central government, and history had shown that in the case of conflict, they usually sided with the emperor over their king. If you recall, during the coup against the Lius, the chancellor of Qi had tried to use his command of the Qi soldiers to prevent his king, Liu Xian, from marching on Chang'an. For an even more recent example, the chancellors of Chu and Zhao, as well as some of the other ministers, had resisted their king's intentions to join the current rebellion with such vehemence that those kings had resorted to murdering them. It's hard to know the situation though, as we're not given much information on the character of this particular chancellor of Huainan. Interestingly, after the rebellion, An was not punished for his disloyalty. On the northern front, while he said that the king of Zhao had been making arrangements with the king of Yan, I can't find any mentions of such arrangements anywhere else in the records, and when the time came, Yan did not join the revolt. Zhao did in fact send envoys to the Xiongnu who were willing to participate. However, they had a different perspective on the conflict. For the leaders of the Xiongnu, it was not a life or death struggle. Unlike the feudal kings, the Han government wouldn't be able to inflict much punishment on them even if the revolt was unsuccessful. It was just an opportunity to do some raiding. As such, they mobilised at a leisurely pace, and the king of Zhao decided to take a defensive posture until the forces of Chu and Wu got to the Yellow River so that he could join them. Therefore, the attack on Guangzhong from the north that Liu Bei had hoped for was not to be. Perhaps the front that had the worst start-up, though, was the Shandong Peninsula, whence the Shandong kings under Liu Ang were meant to strike. I say that this was the worst start-off because in this case, it wasn't kings whom Liu Bei was only now inviting who failed to join the revolt. It was kings that had already agreed to the plot. The king of Jubei wasn't prepared for the revolt to happen yet, and his chief of palace attendants threatened him and told him not to go through with it. The king of Qi, Liu Jiangliu, decided to remain loyal to the Han. This stalled the whole front because rather than marching to Chang'an, the rest of the kings, led by Liu Ang, decided to besiege Linzi, the capital of Qi. All up, it looked as though only one prong of the multi-pronged attack that Liu Bei had envisioned would be advancing. All these dropouts left the seven kingdoms, which give the war its name: Wu, Chu, Zhao, Jiaoxi, Jiaodong, Jinan, and Sichuan. When Jingdi received news of the rebellion, he was quick to respond. He dispatched 4 armies, one to attack Zhao, one to attack the Shandong kingdoms, one to garrison Xinjiang, and the 4th, the most important, to attack the armies of Wu and Chu. This 4th one was to be led by the Marquis of Tiao, Zhou Yafu. Zhou Yafu was the son of Zhou Bo, the supreme commander who had orchestrated the coup against the Lius and had served as chancellor in the early years of Wendi's reign. He had been a general during the Xiongnu invasion of 158 BC. Zhou had taken his military responsibilities very seriously. When Wendi had gone to inspect the various army camps, he found that most of them let him in without question. However, when he visited Zhou's camp, he found the men battle-ready, and the sentries refused him entry until their general was presented with the imperial credentials, and he gave the order to let the emperor in. When the emperor's carriage passed through the camp gates, the guards warned him that their general had a rule against galloping inside the camp, so Wendi accordingly proceeded at a slower pace. When Zhou Yafu came out to meet the emperor, he was wearing his full set of armour, and asked if he could be excused from making the usual prostrations due an emperor in the civil sphere, asking instead that they conduct their conversation with military etiquette. Wendi was very impressed. Later, when he was leaving the camp, he exclaimed to his attendants, quote, "Now this is a real general," and sung Zhou Yafu's praises for the rest of the trip. 2 years later, when Wendi was on his deathbed, he advised his son, the future Jingdi, quote, "If there is ever any trouble, Zhou Yafu is the best man fitted to lead the troops." Jingdi followed his advice. At the onset of the rebellion, he promoted Zhou to the position of Supreme Commander, the highest military position and one of the three highest in government, along with the Chancellor and the Imperial Councillor. The news of the rebellion also sparked some political intrigue that caused Jingdi to make a bit of a blunder. Upon hearing of the revolt, Chao Cuo had considered executing his rival Yuan, accusing him of having known about Liu Pei's intentions and hiding them from the government. Yuan heard what was on Chao Cuo's mind, and quickly organised a meeting with the emperor before Chao could take any action. Jingdi was quite willing to have an interview with Yuan, because he considered that Yuan might be able to provide him with some information about Liu Pei's capabilities and motives, given his time as Chancellor of Wu. Jingdi questioned Yuan about Liu Pei in the presence of the important men of the court, including Chao Cuo. Jingdi asked Yuan to assess how much of a threat Liu Pei's rebellion posed. To his surprise, Yuan replied that it would be no trouble. Jingdi asked how he could say such a thing, given the wealth of Wu and the worthy men Liu Pei had attracted to his court. While Jingdi acknowledged Pei's wealth, he claimed that Liu Pei was not, in fact, aided by worthy men. If he had been, they would have advised him not to revolt. This was accepted as a valid argument by the court, and Jingdi questioned Yuan about what strategy he would recommend. Yuan asked that he be allowed to tell the emperor in private, so Jingdi dismissed the courtiers, leaving only Chao Cuo. But Yuan insisted, quote, "What I have to say is not for the ears of your majesty's ministers." Fuming, Chao Cuo left the room, and Yuan told Jingdi his plan. He explained that Liu Pei and the other kings blamed Chao Cuo for having their territory confiscated, and he argued that Jingdi's only option was to pardon the revolting kings, restore their lost territories to them, and execute Chao Cuo. Jingdi was silent for a long time, then slowly assented, saying, quote, "If your plan would really work, I would not hesitate to sacrifice a single man in order to appease the rest of the empire." 10 days after their discussion, Jingdi sent a carriage to pick up Chao Cuo. Chao, who did not suspect anything, wore his ministerial robes as he would if the emperor had wanted an ordinary meeting with him. But to his surprise, the carriage took him not to the imperial palace, but to the marketplace. There, he met a brutal end, being cut in two at the waist. We can't know whether Yuan thought his plan would actually appease Liu Pei, or whether he was using the rebellion as an opportunity to dispatch of his rival. Either way, modern historians have been very critical of Jingdi for going through with the execution. Whatever Chao's faults, he was loyal and competent. I've only discussed him in relation to the rebellion, but throughout his career he had also offered intelligent advice on other matters, such as methods to deal with the Xiongnu and economic policy. Translator of the Book of Han, Homer H. Dubs, described the execution as, quote, "cowardly," and says, "Chao Cuo's death merely aided the rebels by removing a faithful and far-seeing servant of the emperor, and by discouraging bold and loyal imperial subjects." However, traditional historians were much less sympathetic to Chao Cuo. Sima Qian even saw him as the cause of the rebellion. He said, quote, "Chao Cuo whittled away at the feasts of the other nobles until he had caused the 7 kingdoms to rise up, join together in alliance, and defy the capital. This came about because the nobles were too powerful, and because Chao Cuo's measures to suppress them were not gradual enough." Sima would have preferred that the kingdoms be reduced without provoking a revolt, like the method of Jia Yi that we talked about last week, petitioning a kingdom and giving the pieces to several of the ruler's sons, keeping them happy and at the same time making feudatories smaller with each successive generation. For his own sake, I hope that Yuan genuinely believed in his plan, because Jingdi soon forced him to put his own skin in the game. He sent Yuan as the envoy to Liu Pei to inform the dissident king about the execution of Chao Cuo and the emperor's intention to restore the lost territories. However, when he arrived, Yuan was faced with the reality that he should have known all along. Liu Pei didn't really care about Chao Cuo, and the execution of the minister would not appease him. This was a rebellion the king of Wu had been contemplating for decades, and he was now making his true ambitions known. When he heard that Yuan came bearing a message from the imperial government, Liu Pei laughed and declared, quote, "I am already Emperor of the East. What need have I to grant audience to anyone else?" He asked Yuan to abandon Han and join him, and when Yuan refused, had him held prisoner in the army camp. Yuan was able to escape thanks to a connection he happened to have made whilst he was Chancellor of Wu. In those years, a man of Wu had an illicit affair with one of Yuanang's servant women, but when Yuan discovered the relationship, he decided not to punish the man. By coincidence, this man happened to be serving in the camp where Yuan was being held, and helped Yuan sneak out of the camp in gratitude for the forgiveness he had received at that time. Liu Pei's gloat that he already ruled half of China was a bit of an overstatement. Things were not going well for the rebels. The Shandong kingdoms were all stuck laying siege to Linzi, the capital of Qi, and meanwhile, the Han army sent to Zhao had beaten that kingdom's armies back to the major city of Handan, where they were now besieged. The Xiongnu showed no signs of coming to the rescue. Now, we aren't told the exact dates when these sieges of Linzi and Handan started, but this was all happening within the first month of the rebellion. Liu Pei consulted with his generals on the best strategy to proceed with. Chu and Wu were in a bad spot. Not only were their allies stationary, but time was against them. Despite the wealth of Wu, in a lengthy war, it would not be able to compete with what the imperially held Guangdong region could produce, as had been demonstrated by the conquests of Qin and the Chu-Han contention. Moreover, Liu Pei needed to secure a food supply, which is why he had set Xingyang and the Yao Granary as his first major objective. For all his money, if he could not feed his army, then they would not be an effective fighting force for long. The other disadvantage was the relative makeup of the armies. The forces wielded by the rebel states were largely composed of infantry, whereas the Han had a respectable number of cavalry and chariots. Although the standing imperial army at the start of the Han dynasty had very few cavalry, historian Junshu Zhang puts the arm as a mere 1 or 2% of Liu Bang's forces. Wendi had taken some measures to train more horsemen to counter the Xiongnu. This advantage that the Han army held over that of Wu and Chu would be most useful in the plains area around the Yellow River, where the speed and mobility of cavalry and chariots could be used most effectively. Thus, the longer Liu Pei spent on the march along the Yellow River to Guangdong, the longer he would be exposed to this danger. Liu Pei's general-in-chief, Tian Lubo, advised the king that, given their disadvantageous situation, he may need to resort to, quote, unusual tactics. Tian himself suggested that Pei give him command of a force of 50,000 men to lead an expedition up the Yangtze River, through Huainan and Changsha, and attack Guangdong from the south through the Wu Pass, basically to do what would have been done by the sons of the late king of Changsha, had they actually joined the revolt. However, on the advice of his son, the heir apparent, Liu Pei refused to give Tian Lubo the troops for a southern expedition, on the grounds that it would weaken his own army, and that given the nature of the war, a revolt against the recognised authority over China, it was difficult to trust subordinates enough to give them large, independent commands. Another general, a man named Huan, who was a younger fellow, suggested a different strategy. It was designed as a solution to the time dilemma. He recommended that they advance with all speed and take the Yao Granary and the city Luoyang, which was further west along the Yellow River, ignoring all the other cities along the way. This way, they would be able to provision the army from the granary, and they could bottle up the passes of Guangdong before the Han could send too much cavalry into the plains region. To me, this sounds like it would have been Liu Pei's best bet. However, the older generals didn't like the idea. They wanted to do things the orthodox way, taking one city at a time as they advanced. They laughed at Huan, saying, quote, "Only a young man who thinks of nothing but dashing into the face of the enemy would suggest such a move. What does he know about overall strategy?" With the majority of his generals shooting down the proposal, Liu Pei decided against it. The only unusual tactic that he ended up using was one which carried minimal risk. A man called Zhou Qiu, one of the criminals who had found refuge in Wu, was feeling passed over because he had not received a commission in Pei's army. He told the king that all he needed was a set of the credentials that were used by the Han envoys, and he would be able to win over a region for the rebels. Pei agreed, and Zhou Qiu took the credentials and travelled to his native land of Xiapei, a small region on the Sea River in the east of China. The region was on lockdown after the rebellion, but Zhou was able to gain access using the credentials, and when he was there, he convinced the region that if they did not join the rebels, they would all be massacred. Thus, he was able to assemble an army of 30,000 men, and he took them north, gathering more as they went, until he is said to have had 100,000. They pillaged the countryside of the kingdom of Changyang, the Qi kingdom which Liu Wang and the others had considered too loyal to let in on the plot. As for the main army, they made their steady advance. Their first obstacle on the way to Xinjiang was the kingdom of Liang, which lay between the Yellow River in the north and the Huai River in the south. Here they were met with success. Liu Bei had been preparing a rebellion for a long time after all, and his army was a good match against any of the other kingdoms. They took the city Jibi, killing 20 or 30,000 men, and when the king of Liang sent 6 of his generals to meet them, they defeated 2 and the others retreated. Panicked, Liang sent envoys to the emperor, begging Jingdi to order Zhou Yafu to come to its assistance. So, what was Zhou Yafu doing? Though he was in charge of attacking the army of Wu and Chu, he at first had approached cautiously. He marched to Xinjiang and established it as his base of operations. Then he advanced into Huayang, a little kingdom on the western border of Liang, which was ruled by one of Jingdi's sons. While there, Zhou Yafu consulted with one of his colonels, Deng, on the quality of the armies of Wu and Chu, and what strategy they should adopt. Colonel Deng told Zhou Yafu, quote, "The troops of Wu have very keen striking power and would be difficult to meet head-on. Those of Chu are lightly equipped and will not be able to hold out for long." Although initially disparaging of the Chu army, they soon saw the difficulty of dealing with light infantry. Zhou later reported to the emperor, quote, "The troops of Chu are swift and nimble, and it will be difficult to make contact with them." Zhou and Deng decided that the best strategy was to make their base at Changyi, in the northeastern shoulder of Liang. There, they would heavily fortify their position, and let the armies of Liang, Wu, and Chu duke it out, all the while using their light cavalry to attack the rebel supply lines. Jingdi initially approved this strategy. When Liang started feeling the force of the rebels' attack, the king of Liang asked Zhou Yafu to leave his fort at Changyi and come and help, but Zhou refused. His strategy of cutting off their food was steadily weakening Wu and Chu, and he didn't want to give up on that and risk an open battle. It was after this refusal that the king of Liang started asking Jingdi to order Zhou to come to the aid of Liang. Jingdi was alarmed and persuaded by the plea. After all, Liu Wu, the king of Liang, was his younger brother. He ordered Zhou Yafu to engage Liu Pei's army, but showing the same dedication to military autonomy that he had displayed when Wendi inspected his camp during the invasion of the Xiongnu, Zhou boldly disobeyed even this order from the emperor himself. He believed Liang would be able to slow the rebel army long enough, and refused to prioritize the emperor's personal desires ahead of what he deemed the best military strategy. Zhou Yafu's confidence in Liang was rewarded. After the king of Liang realized he was, for the moment, on his own, he again sent 2 of his generals to attack Liu Bei. Perhaps the detachment Zhou had sent to attack the supply lines was having an effect. These 2 generals fared better than the first 6, and managed to defeat the rebels in several minor encounters. It was an heroic effort on the part of Liang. Though we are not given much detail on this particular moment of the war, Sima Qian says that by the end, quote, "In the number of enemy killed and prisoners taken, the Liang armies had achieved virtually as much as the forces of the Han government." Liu Bei decided that he would have to take a different approach. A drive west through Liang was now impossible. He would turn north and attack the crouching tiger, Zhou Yafu. For reasons unknown to history, Zhou abandoned his strong position at Changyi and moved south to encounter them. He set up a wild camp at Xiaoyi, where the decisive confrontation would now occur. The armies of Chu and Wu encircled the camp and tried to provoke an attack. Although they were the ones surrounding, they were also in danger of starving out. I assume that Zhou's detachment of light cavalry was still out, making it difficult to transport food from Wu to the rebel army. Meanwhile, Zhou's main army may have taken a lot of supplies with them when they were in Xinjiang, and had enough stores in their camp to last a long time. The siege dragged on for weeks. All the while, Zhou remained stoically calm. One night, some sort of riot broke out in the camp, or a small band of rebels broke into the camp, and the violence nearly reached Zhou's own tent. However, he didn't let it bother him. He just stayed in bed, and soon the more junior officers were able to restore order. A month passed and the siege continued. The men of Wu and Chu grew hungry. Throughout the siege, the rebels' armies made attack after attack on the walls of the camp, but each time they were driven back. Finally, during the second month, a portion of the rebel army made a rush at the southeastern corner, but Zhou Yafu guessed that this was a feint, and prepared his soldiers in the northwest. Sure enough, the cream of the rebel army appeared from there, but they were unable to breach the walls, and after fierce fighting, they were driven back. This last defeat finally broke the spirit of the starving and desperate rebel army. They retreated, but Zhou sent his best soldiers in pursuit, breaking them completely. Liu Bei gathered a few thousand of his soldiers and fled south, leaving the rest to be captured, killed, or to starve. After the victory at Xiaoyi, Jingdi issued an edict on the rebellion. It read, quote, "It is said that heaven rewards the doer of good with blessings and the doer of evil with misfortune. Emperor Gaozu in person bestowed marks of recognition on his worthy ministers and set up the various feudal lords. Later, when the kingdoms of Liu Yor, King Yor of Zhao, and Liu Fei, King Dao Hui of Qi, were left without heirs, Emperor Wen took pity upon them and established Liu Yor's son Liu Sui as king of Zhao, and Liu Wang and the other sons of Liu Fei as kings in the region of Qi, so that they might tend the mortuary temples of their ancestors, the former kings, and serve as bastion states to the court of Han. In so doing, his virtuous generosity rivaled that of heaven and earth, and his enlightenment matched the sun and the moon. And yet Liu Bei, the king of Wu, turned his back upon such generosity and betrayed his duty, inviting fugitives and criminals from all over the empire to come to his kingdom, debasing the currency of the empire by his minting of coins, and on the grounds that he was ill, refused for over 20 years to attend the court of the emperor. The officials repeatedly recommended that Liu Bei be called to account for his crimes, but Emperor Wen preferred to be lenient, hoping that in time he would mend his ways and do good. Now he is joined with the king of Chu, Liu Wu, the king of Zhao, Liu Sui, the king of Jiaoxi, Liu Ang, the king of Jinan, Liu Biguang, the king of Sichuan, Liu Xian, and the king of Jiadong, Liu Xiongchu, in an alliance of revolt, committing the most heinous treason. He has murdered the ministers and envoys of the Han, oppressed the commoners, slaughtered the innocent, and fired the homes of the people, and dug up the grave mounds, spreading the utmost tyranny before him. Liu Wang and the others have added even greater outrage, burning down the temples of the dynasty and pillaging the sacred objects. Deeply grieved by these acts, I have donned the white robes of mourning and retired from the whole of state. I call upon my generals to urge forth their officers and strike at the rebellious villains. In attacking the rebels, he who marches deepest into their territories and kills the largest number shall win the highest merit. In question of whether to cut off the heads of the captives or take them prisoner, let all those who are of 300 pickle rank or above be killed on the spot without mercy. If anyone shall dare to question this edict or fail to obey it, he shall be cut in two at the waist." Frightening stuff. I'm sure the crimes of the rebels were a bit exaggerated, but he did have a pretty decent reason to be upset. What strikes me as most interesting in this edict is the contrast it highlights between Wendi and Jingdi. I get the feeling that if Wendi had to issue an edict following a rebellion like this one, the main themes would have been self-reprimand for failing to set a good example, and disappointment in the revolting kings, and a reluctant announcement that they would be punished. He probably would have guaranteed a pardon for every rebel soldier who surrendered. Jingdi, on the other hand, was all righteous indignation and ruthlessness. With the words and wrath of the emperor chasing him, Liu Bei kept running. He crossed the Yangtze, went back to Wu, and didn't stop until he left China, hiding out with his allies, the barbarian Dongor. While there, he made a last-ditch effort to rebuild his forces. The Dongor had 10,000 men ready, and he gathered what remains he could of his original army. However, his efforts met an abrupt end when Jingdi managed to bribe the Dongor into betraying Liu Bei and killing him. While he was reviewing his troops, a man suddenly broke ranks and stabbed him with a spear. All his years of build-up and planning had achieved nothing, and his ambitions for power and revenge on the man who had killed his son were ended. The Dongor decapitated the corpse and sent the head to Jingdi. In recognition of their help, the emperor did not impose any punishments on the Dongor for their assisting in the rebellion. After the death of Liu Bei, nearly all the other fronts of the war were quieted. Two of Pei's sons fled into Minyue. The king of Chu committed suicide. When he heard of Pei's defeat, Zhou Qiu, the man who had tricked Xia Pei into joining the rebellion and had been harassing Chengyang, gave up and returned to Xia Pei, only to die of an ulcer on his return. The Shandong kingdoms were still besieging Linzi, but Han forces were on their way to rescue the city. Inside, the King of Qi had no idea how the rest of the war was proceeding, and he was beginning to think he should surrender and join the rebels. Before the city had been laid to siege, he had managed to send one of his ministers, a man named Lu, to report the situation to the emperor. Now, Lu returned with the message that Wu and Chu had been defeated, and that the Han were on their way. However, with the city surrounded on all sides by hostile armies, Lu had no way to tell the king. He was picked up by the Shandong forces, who saw an opportunity to further sap Linzi's morale. They agreed to take Lu to the foot of the city walls, but ordered him under pain of death to tell the King of Qi that the Han armies had been defeated, and that if the city did not surrender immediately, the inhabitants would all be massacred. However, in a gallant sacrifice, when Lu spotted the King of Qi atop the walls, he shouted, quote, "The Han court has already dispatched a force of 1,000,000 men, and the Grand Commandant Zhou Yafu has attacked and defeated Wu and Chu. Even now he is leading his men to rescue Qi. Qi must hold fast to the city and not surrender." The Shandong kings hastily killed Lu, but it was too late. The message had been delivered, and the King of Qi would not surrender. Soon, the Han armies arrived and defeated those of the Shandong kingdoms. Tragically, though, Liu Jiangliu, the King of Qi, was fearful that he might be punished for initially being party to the plot, and he committed suicide before the Han generals could meet him. The other Shandong kings fled back to their own kingdoms. When he returned, Liu Wang, the one who had initially agreed to Liu Pei's plot, sat upon a straw mat, bearing his arms, and refused to eat or drink anything. He begged his mother for forgiveness. His son tried to persuade him that they still had a chance. They could launch a surprise attack, and if unsuccessful, they could flee to the islands off the east coast. However, Ang would have none of it. He could see that they were utterly defeated. A Han general, Han Tuidang, sent a letter to Ang, saying, quote, "I have been ordered by the Emperor to punish those who have failed in their duty. Those who surrender will be pardoned for their crimes and treated as before. Those who fail to surrender will be wiped out. Which course will the King of Jiaxi choose? I will await your answer and act accordingly." Ang travelled out of the city to Han's army and prostrated himself before the camp gates. He professed, quote, "Because I have failed to honour the laws of the Empire with sufficient care, I have brought alarm to the common people and burdened the general, causing him to journey this great distance to my worthless kingdom. For such crimes, I deserve to be punished by having my flesh cut up and pickled." Han Tuidang emerged and stood over the king, solemnly holding the gong and drum, which were used to signal to soldiers in battle. He questioned Ang about why he had revolted in the first place. The king attempted to use the excuse that he had been trying to purge Chang'an of the evil influence of Chao's Tzuo. Han pointed out that if this was his true goal, there was no need to rebel. He could have just sent a letter to the emperor expressing his worries. He didn't even mention the fact that Chao's Tzuo had already been executed. The lame facade up, the king admitted that there was no way he could atone for his actions. Shortly after the meeting, he committed suicide. This was followed by the suicides of his mother, his son, other members of his family, and the rest of the Shandong kings. The only rebel army left was that of Zhao, besieged in the city of Handan. This siege dragged on for much of the rest of the year. It lasted either 7 or 10 months, depending on which chapter of the records you read. It finally ended with the Han General Luan Bu joining the imperial forces there, and diverting a nearby river to flood the city. The waters collapsed the city walls, and Liu Sui, the king of Zhao, committed suicide. Thus, the revolt of the Seven Kingdoms came to an end. On paper, the rebellion was probably the most powerful internal threat to the Han dynasty since its inception. If that's the case, what's surprising is how easily the Han was able to repress it. In all that time I was talking about it, there wasn't even one instance where it looked like the rebels held the advantage over the government. It's a testament to how the strength of the centre and the loyalty it commanded from individual kings and ministers had grown in the half-century since the ascension of Gaozu. The end of the rebellion left the central government in an even stronger position. More territory was confiscated from the kingdoms that had rebelled. Jingdi also took the chance to put his own sons on the thrones of Chu, Jiaxi, Jiaodong, and Wu, renamed Jiangdu. A few months after the rebellion, a pardon was granted to those who had participated in it. Further measures were taken throughout Jingdi's reign to disempower the kingdoms. Several moves were made to reduce the independence and status of the royal ministerial cabinets. In the third year of the Middle Period, 147 BC, the office of royal councillor, the provincial equivalent of the imperial councillor, was abolished. In 145, the title of the king's chancellors was changed to communicated demotion in status compared to the equivalent position in the central government, from Cheng Xiang to Xiang, though I'm going to continue referring to them as chancellors. In 144, other titles in the royal government were changed, and the number of councillors and courtiers the kings were allowed to have was reduced. In 142, another move was made, which was perhaps designed as a further strengthening of the central government. It involved the marquesas and whether they ought to live in the capital, Chang'an, or in their marquesates. The trouble is, the records in the Book of Han differ in exactly what the marquesas were ordered to do, and in fact seem to be saying completely opposite things. The record says that, quote, the number of marquesas in the capital was reduced, and the remainder were ordered to their territories. But the book says, quote, the emperor dispensed with marquesas going to their states, presumably referring to Emperor Wen's order from 178, encouraging the marquesas to remove from Chang'an and take up residence in their fiefdoms, and saying that this order was now rescinded. Historian Zhun Shuzhang accepts the line of the Book of Han and interprets the move as a way to disempower regional polities. A dissident nobleman may have a lot harder time causing trouble if he lived in Chang'an under the nose of the emperor, instead of in his distant marquisate, where he would be the local authority. On the other hand, rather than a show of strength, the move could have been a sign that Wendy's original policy had failed, and that marquesas were still mainly living in the capital. If we take the reading from the records that the marquesas were being asked to leave Chang'an, then it's a sign that Wendy's initial order hadn't worked, and was now being reiterated. If we take the reading from the book, then ordering the marquesas to live in the capital could just be the central government taking ownership of the reality that they already were. Also worth noting is that in 144, the king of Liang, Liu Wu, died, and his kingdom was split into 5, the different divisions being granted to his sons. It was the same strategy that Wendi had applied to the kingdoms of Qi and Huainan, weakening one of the few remaining powerful kingdoms, and at the same time appearing generous. It at least appeased Empress Dowager Dor, the mother of Jingdi and Liu Wu. She had been particularly fond of Wu, and as we'll see, she had some reasons to be upset with Jingdi on Wu's behalf. However, when all of Wu's sons were made kings, she made her peace with Jingdi. The Revolt of the Seven Kingdoms was the most spectacular event in the reign of Jingdi, and his effective, if schizophrenic, immediate response to it, together with the further reductions of the kingdoms in the years afterwards, is what he is most recognised for. For the remainder of the Western Han dynasty, the vassal kingdoms never again presented a serious threat. Now, we'll get into some of the other aspects of his reign: economic policy, legal policy, the Xiongnu, and court intrigues. The first major economic decision of Jingdi's reign was to reintroduce the land tax in the 5th month of the first year, summer 156 BC. If you remember in Wendi's reign, the tax had been decreased and eventually abolished. When Jingdi brought the tax back, it was at the reduced rate of 1/30th, rather than 1/15th, as it had been when it was first implemented by the Han. Jingdi shared the same basic economic philosophy as his father. The manufacture of luxury goods and merchants was a distant second priority, if not a detriment, to farming and silk production. He issued some edicts which are similar to ones that Wendi made. The most detailed is from the 4th month of the 2nd year of the latter period of his reign, summer 148 BC. Quoting from the Book of Han. Carved ornaments and chiseled engravings are matters that injure agriculture. Brocade, embroidery, vermilion silk ribbons, and braided ribbons harm women's work. Injury to agriculture is the source of hunger. Harm to women's work is the cause of suffering from cold. Verily, when hunger and cold both come at the same time, there are few who will be able to keep from doing wrong. We ourselves plough, and the Empress herself cultivates silkworms in order to lead the empire by furnishing the millet, the sacrificial grain, and the sacrificial robes for the imperial ancestral temples. We have not accepted the yearly offerings, taxes paid by commanderies and nobles. We have reduced the supplies of the Grand Provisioner. We have diminished the amount of public service and the poll taxes, wishing that the empire should stress agriculture and sericulture, silk production. and should constantly have stores and provisions in order to be prepared for visitations and calamities. The strong should not rob from the weak, the many should not do violence to the few, the aged and those over 60 should die a natural death, and the young and orphans should be allowed to grow to maturity. The edict ends with Jingdi blaming corrupt officials for bad harvests. There's a few similarities to Wendi there. The emperor and empress personally farming and raising silkworms to set an example for the country, and the reduction of taxes and declining of tribute to help minimise the suffering of a bad year. There is one notable point of departure in attitude to economics though. While Wendi had made a show of personally living a humble lifestyle, wearing coarse clothes and shunning luxuries, Jingdi is not anywhere mentioned as following suit. The other major economic decision of Jingdi's reign was the re-establishment of minting as a government monopoly. As we discussed earlier, private minting had been legalised by Gaozu, criminalised by Empress Liu, and legalised against by Wendi. In the 12th month of the 6th year of the Middle Period, winter 145-4 BC, Jingdi made private minting and the production of counterfeit gold a capital offence, thus re-establishing a government monopoly. Coin manufacture remained a solely government business until the end of former Han. The chapters on Jingdi in the book and the records don't explain why the decision was made. However, changes in minting policy were generally made because of two needs. Privatising enabled more coins to be produced, while monopolising was the best way to ensure that all the coins were made at a consistent standard, while also cutting off one of the avenues that men like Liu Pe used to get so rich that they could legitimately threaten the imperial government. Another area where Jingdi carried on the spirit of his father was in the justice system. Wendi had dispersed with some of the more severe punishments, such as mutilation and enslavement of a criminal's family. Jingdi made some more decisions in that direction. In the second month of the second year of the Middle Period, spring 148 BC, there was a change to the punishment of execution. What that change actually was depends on the interpretation of a particular word, which could either mean cutting or exposure. According to 2nd century AD scholar Ying Xiao, the punishment of quartering the body of a criminal after he had been executed was done away with, or was made available only for the most terrible crimes. But according to the 7th century AD scholar Yan Shigu, it meant that the body was no longer to be exposed in the marketplace after the execution had been carried out. Either way, it was probably seen as an improvement for those sentenced to execution. A greater boon was granted in the autumn of 146 BC, when those sentenced to execution were granted the option of being castrated instead. However, this didn't mean that executions became rare. For many, especially the elite, castration was a fate worse than death. It meant becoming a state slave, as eunuchs were used to attend to the emperor and his harem, or were put to other work. Famously, Sima Qian himself was faced with this choice during the reign of Jingdi's successor, and chose the humiliation of castration so that he could finish his work on the records. After the punishment had been carried out, Sima wrote a letter to his friend Renan, which is a very depressing insight into the mind of a man who has had all his pride shattered. One section reads, quote, "No disgrace is greater than the palace punishment, castration. That a man who has undergone such a punishment is fit no longer to be associated with, is the opinion not of one age alone, but has been held since ancient times. When Duke Ling of Wei rode in the same carriage as Yong Chu, Confucius departed for Chen. Because Shang Yang obtained audience with the king through the officers of Jing Jian, Zhao Liang's heart turned cold. When Zhao Tan rode in the emperor's carriage, Yuan Sui was fired with anger. This last incident occurred during the reign of Wendi. Yuan Si, also known as Yuanang, was the same man who advised Jingdi to execute Qiao Cuo. So, from old times, men have been ashamed to associate with eunuchs. If even ordinary men are loath to have dealings with eunuchs, how much more so in the case of gentlemen of virtue and feeling? Although our court today may be in need of good men, what business would I, a mere remnant of the knife and saw, have in trying to help and recommend the finest and most worthy men of the world? Nevertheless, I'm sure some men appreciated having the choice of a life of shame rather than no life at all. Another act to decrease the severity of punishments happened in the 5th month of the 6th year of the Middle Period, summer 144 BC. The size of the stick used in beatings was standardised to ensure that excessively harmful implements were not being used, and Jingdi also reprimanded officials who were too eager to use the punishment. As well as this concern with punishments, Jingdi also made changes to make the actual running of the justice system fairer. He was particularly worried about bribery and favouritism corrupting the judicial process, with judges picking and choosing from the vast amount of written law to justify sentences that were really decided according to their personal biases. In the 9th month of the 5th year of the Middle Period, autumn 145 BC, he issued an edict on the matter, quoting from the book. The laws and ordinances, the measures and weights, are for the purposes of preventing violence and of stopping wrongdoing. Criminal tribunes are the great determiners of people's fate, for the dead cannot come to life again. Some of the officials do not uphold laws and ordinances. They make a business of presents and bribes. They form parties and cliques and practice favouritism. They consider merciless inquisition as penetration, and exacting cruelty as perspicacity, so that they cause the innocent to lose their positions. We pity them greatly, and the guilty do not suffer for their crimes. They violate the laws and act tyrannously. It is utterly unspeakable. Whenever a judicial case is doubtful, although the decision may have been made out as if it fits the law, if yet it does not satisfy people's minds, the case shall be specially referred to a superior. According to 19th century scholar Zhou Shouchang, Jingdi decided to issue this edict because of a case that had appeared before him that year. A man named Fang Nian was on trial for killing his stepmother, who had killed his father. According to the law, Fang Nian's action was matricide and treason, a very serious crime. However, Jingdi did not feel like it was just to punish Fang, since he was acting to avenge his father. He put the question to his son, the heir apparent Liu Che, who was a mere 12 years old at the time. The boy was able to provide an argument for why the murder of a stepmother should not be treated as seriously as the murder of a biological mother, and thus Fang Nian was not tried for treason. Jingdi made the declaration so that decisions which were ostensibly in accordance with the law, but did not seem to be in agreement with the spirit of justice, could be brought up for review. Later, Jingdi further articulated the process for judicial review. In an edict from the 1st month of the 1st year of the latter period, spring 143 BC, he said, quote, "A trial at law is an important matter. Some people are wise and some are stupid. Some officials are superior and some inferior. When, in a trial, it is doubtful what to decide, the case should be referred to the high officials. What the high officials cannot settle should be transferred to the commandant of justice. If it is ordered that a matter should be referred to a superior judge, and later it is found that it should not have been referred, that reference does not constitute a fault. We desire to bring it about that those who judge lawsuits should above all take care to be lenient." Now, this edict doesn't mean that there had been no possibility of appeal prior to Jingdi. In the Han Dynasty, cases were usually decided by the administrator of the unit of government that arrested the criminal, whether that be the magistrate of the local county or the governor of a commandery. Even though jurisdictions overlapped, there were rarely disputes over who had authority to conduct the trial. However, it was always possible for a higher administrator, such as a governor, to intervene in a decision made by a lower one, such as a magistrate. One of the 9 ministers, the superintendent of trials, was usually the highest judge in the land, though he could be overridden by the emperor himself. So reviews were not a new feature of the system. Jingdi was merely insisting that they be done when a decision was a bit shaky. Loosely tying in with the matter of corrupt judges, there was a move that was designed to allow more incorrupt men a pathway into government. From the start of the dynasty, men had to meet a property requirement before they could become an official, which was measured in how much they paid in property taxes. The way the property tax worked was that for every 10,000 cash worth of capital a man owned, he had to pay 120 cash in tax. To be considered for a governmental position, a man had to pay 10 times the property tax, meaning he had to have wealth amounting to 100,000 cash. Jingdi lowered this entry bar to 4 times the property tax, meaning wealth amounting to 40,000 cash. The edict announcing this reasoned that wealth was not a guarantee that someone would make a good official. On the contrary, relative poverty could be a sign that a man would be a desirable candidate, because, quoting from the book, "Only incorrupt gentlemen make their desires few and are easily satisfied." The move foreshadowed a great opening up of the bureaucracy that would take place under the next emperor. Of course, we have to talk about the Xiongnu. Jingdi's reign was a time of relatively quiet relations. The He-Qin treaty system continued. In the 1st month of the 5th year, spring 152 BC, a princess was sent to marry the Shan Yu. Now, the He-Qin system had come under criticism during the reign of Wendi. It was expensive and not very effective. After all, the Han had been marrying princesses and sending gifts to the Shanyu since the reign of Gaozu, and yet we've talked about several significant Xiongnu incursions throughout this podcast. Moreover, there were no signs that this limited method of introducing Chinese goods and people into the ranks of the Xiongnu was turning the Xiongnu toward Han customs and attitudes, as had been hoped. Alternatives had to be found. During the reign of Wendi, two of the most insightful statesmen, Jia Yi and Xiao Cuo, proposed new strategies. Jia Yi had recommended trading with the Xiongnu and lavishing the Shanyu's subordinates with gifts, so as to encourage defections. Xiao Cuo recommended government-subsidized colonization of the border regions, which could then be defended with fortified cities. His proposal contains his vision for such a city, which is pretty awesome. It's from the Book of Han. Quote, "For these migrants, the government could construct walled cities, protected by high walls and deep moats and the placement of catapults and iron thorns. Within each city, an inner wall is also to be constructed, the distance between this and the outer wall measuring 150 paces. Constructed at strategic points and along thoroughfares, these walled cities could be designed to hold no fewer than 1,000 households each. Surrounding each residential area, sandy fields could be laid out as a further protective measure. These sandy fields were a method to easily trace footprints of enemy scouts who ventured close to the city." Both Zhao's and Chao's proposals were taken up, and some events in Jingdi's reign suggest that the attraction of Chinese culture was having some effect. There was an instance where several important Xiongnu leaders defected to the Han. However, abandoning the Heiqian system could have provoked a full-on invasion, and China was not yet ready for something like that. So, through the reign of Jingdi, the system continued. One measure that was taken during Jingdi's time, which was perhaps made in consideration of the Xiongnu, was to lower the age where men were required to provide military service. This was done in the 12th month of the second year, winter 156-5. The line in the book reads, quote, "The emperor ordered that young men of the empire should be first enregistered for military service and taxes in their 20th year." Now the scholar Yan Shigu interprets this to mean that the military age was lowered from 23 to 20. However, the 19th century scholar Shen Qinhan sees it in an entirely different light, saying that the age where people had to start paying the poll tax was raised from 15 to 20, meaning it was actually a liberal decision. Who knows, maybe it was both. As far as what the Xiongnu actually got up to, we aren't told much in the records. As I mentioned before, the king of Zhao had been negotiating with them to try and get them to join the revolt of the Seven Kingdoms. But they mucked about for the whole war, and once the siege of Handan was over, they decided not to get involved. 4 incursions are recorded during Jingdi's reign. In the summer of 156 they attacked the kingdom of Dai. In the spring of 148, the kingdom of Yan. In the summer of 144, the commanderies Yan Men and Shang. And on this occasion they killed 2,000 Han soldiers and succeeded in stealing imperial horses. And in the spring of 142, they attacked the Yan Men commandery again. Of course, these incidents were tragic for those directly affected by them, but compared to the invasions of Wendi's reign, they were quite minor. After the incursion of 142, Jingdi appointed a new governor of Yan Men, Jidu. Jidu had served previously as a governor of Jinan, as well as the military commandant of Chang'an, and had a reputation for severity and loyalty. I mention this appointment because I love the way Sima Chen portrays the effect the posting had on the Xiongnu. Jidu allegedly frightened the Xiongnu so much that they withdrew their men from the border. They tried training their horse archers by having them shoot at an effigy of Jidu, but his reputation was so fearsome that when they approached the effigy, the riders were so disturbed that they missed their target. Sima concludes, quote, "He was a constant source of worry to the Xiongnu," which is an echo of the introductory paragraph to his chapter on the Xiongnu themselves, in which he says, quote, "From the time of the 3 dynasties on, the Xiongnu have been a source of constant worry and harm to China." If we were to leave things at that, we would probably come off with the impression that Jingdi was a pretty good emperor, a successor to his father's spirit of lenient, benevolent rule, though perhaps more forceful and aggressive in how he dealt with problems. However, there were aspects of his personality which really marred his reign. He tended to fall under the influence of those who had petty personal interests at heart, as we saw with Yuan Ang convincing him to execute Xiao Cuo, while at the same time he could be aggressive towards those who criticised him, which led him to cut off competent and loyal men. 2 cases serve to illustrate this fault of Jingdi's personality. disputes over who should be named his heir, and the career of Zhou Yafu. Jingdi had many children, 14 sons born to 6 different mothers, and an unrecorded number of daughters. It was the largest number of children of any emperor of the former Han dynasty. Given how many offspring he had, and how many consorts, it might not be very surprising that his reign was affected by a few succession disputes. When Jingdi first came to the throne, his main wife, Bo, became empress. Empress Bo was from the same family as Jingdi's grandmother, Grand Empress Dowager Bo, and had been chosen for him by his grandmother. However, Jingdi wasn't especially fond of Lady Bo, and she bore him no children. As such, he didn't have a nominated heir when he first came to the throne. Around this time, he actually casually suggested to his younger brother, Liu Wu, the king of Liang, that he could be the next emperor. Liu Wu politely declined, and for the time being the matter was dropped. However, the idea excited Wu, as well as Empress Dowager Dor, Jingdi and Wu's mother. Grand Empress Dowager Bo died in the 4th month of the 2nd year, summer 155 BC. After this, Jingdi felt free to demote his Empress Bo. The rest of his consorts vied to become the new empress and to have one of their sons chosen as the heir apparent. Empress dowagers could be extremely influential, and being the mother of the heir was the best way for a woman of the imperial harem to make sure she would remain important once her husband died. Jingdi chose his heir apparent in the 4th year, 153. The luckiest son was his eldest, Liu Rong. However, Liu Rong's mother, Lady Li, was not made empress. We are told that Li was jealous by nature, and that this was exacerbated because she was the least favoured of all Jingdi's concubines. I'm sure this is a fairly two-dimensional assessment of her character, but alas, it's all we have. Now, it wasn't just Jingdi's concubines who were part of the power struggle surrounding the person of the emperor, but his female blood relations too. Jingdi's sister, Liu Piao, was interested in marrying her daughter to the heir apparent. This was not at all incestuous. You see, Liu Piao's daughter was a member of Piao's husband's family, Chen, not the Liu family. So, Liu Piao wanted to marry her daughter Chen to Liu Rong. However, Liu Rong's mother would not approve the idea. She thought that the marriage would increase Liu Piao's influence at her own expense. Piao was angered by the refusal, and instead married Chen to one of Jingdi's other sons, Liu Che, whose mother was named Wang Ji. This son, Liu Che, was only 4 or 5 years old at the time of the marriage. Piao had set out to marry her daughter to the heir apparent, and just because Liu Che was not currently the crown prince, did not mean that her goal was now unattainable. Piao set to work slandering the current heir, Liu Rong's mother. One example of this sort of bad-mouthing was when she told Jingdi, quote, "Whenever Lady Li meets any of the ladies of the inner palace who are more honoured and favoured than herself, she has her attendants utter curses and magic spells and spit behind their backs. She is practicing sorcery in an attempt to win your affections." Slowly, she poisoned Jingdi against Lady Li. The slander only furthered Li's bitterness, which of course did nothing to raise her esteem in the eyes of the emperor. One interaction which he found particularly offensive was when he told Lady Li that he hoped she would care for all his sons once he had passed away. Li, who did not at all like the idea of looking after the sons of women who were more favoured than herself, said not a word in reply. In the same time as driving the wedge between Jingdi and Lady Li, Liu Piao exalted Liu Che, reporting to Jingdi that he was a handsome and talented boy. The emperor was already predisposed to Che, as the child had been born on the same day that Jingdi had ascended the throne. Moreover, Che's mother, Wang Ji, claimed that while she was pregnant with Che, she had had a dream in which the sun set in her breast, an auspicious sign indeed. Jingdi grew to favour the boy over all his other sons. However, as yet, he had no plans to remove Liu Rong from the position of heir apparent and set up Liu Che in his place. Wang Ji, who so far had been a bit of a side player in the palace drama, decided to take matters into her own hands. In the 11th month of the 7th year, winter 151-50 BC, knowing that the emperor was unhappy with Lady Li, she duped the superintendent of state visits into arguing in support of nominating Lady Li as empress. After his regular report to Jingdi, the superintendent of state visits brought up the matter. He argued, quote, "A son is honoured because of his mother, and a mother because of her son. Now the mother of the heir apparent has no title. It is fitting that Lady Li be given the title of Empress. Jingdi was enraged. He thought that Lady Li herself must have entreated the superintendent to make this proposition. He said, quote, "What business have you to make such a proposal?" In response, he punished the superintendent and deposed Liu Rong from the position of heir apparent. It was Lady Li who suffered what I'd consider the worst fate, though. From then on, Jingdi refused to see her, and she soon died, bitter and friendless, and consumed by grief. Although Liu Rong had fallen out of favour, Jingdi did not hate him as he did her mother. He was made king of Linjiang. Unfortunately, though, he was not able to live out his days in peace. 4 years after being made king, in 146 BC, he was accused of demolishing the walls of the dynasty's ancestral temples in his kingdom. He was summoned to Chang'an for questioning. He was interrogated by Jingdi, the man who was later appointed to the Yanmeng commandery, and allegedly frightened off the Xiongnu with his mere reputation. At this point in time, he was serving as the military commandant of Chang'an. Jingdi treated Liu Rong very harshly. The cruelest act that we are told about explicitly is Ji denying Rong a paper and brush for him to write a letter to the emperor. However, we can assume that far more awful deeds, including physical beating, were part of the interrogation process. The ordeal shook Rong, and he was even more frightened by thoughts of what would happen to him if he was found guilty. In despair, he committed suicide. We might be going a bit too far to accuse Jingdi of deliberately orchestrating the ruin of his son. It seems to me entirely plausible that he was just responding to the accusations in the standard way, and Rong's suicide may have been fueled by a false impression that his father had it in for him. Unfortunately, though, it's impossible to get into the minds of those involved. But if we go back to when Rong was first deposed, the position of heir apparent was opened up, and it wasn't necessarily guaranteed that Liu Che would be the one to fill it. In fact, one of those who made a bid for it was that brother of Jingdi's, Liu Wu, the king of Liang. He had the support of their powerful mother, Empress Dowager Dor, who was very fond of Liu Wu as her youngest son. Fueled by Jingdi's earlier idle promise that he could be the next emperor, Wu had been dreaming about a life on the throne, and in his own kingdom had started to act in the manner of an emperor, travelling with a giant entourage of 1,000 chariots and 10,000 riders, and sending attendants before him to clear the way before he entered or left his own palace. In the 10th month of the 7th year, winter 151-50, just before Liu Rong was deposed, Liu Wu visited Chang'an. There, he was very close to Jingdi, riding in the same chariot when they went on hunting trips, and his own attendants and ministers carried themselves throughout the city in the manner of their imperial equivalents. In a way, the relationship between Jingdi and Liu Wu was similar to that of Wendi and Liu Chang that we talked about last time, brotherly ties breaking the proper distance between an emperor and his vassal king. However, in the case of Liu Wu, his ability to get away with it was as much, if not more, due to the influence of Empress Dowager Dor, as it was to the affection Jingdi had for him. Liu Wu was still in the capital when Liu Rong lost his place as crown prince. He and his mother hoped that Jingdi might pick Wu as the next heir. Jingdi was considering it, and he consulted with Yuanang on the matter. After orchestrating the execution of Chao Tzuo during the Revolt of the Seven Kingdoms and escaping the clutches of Liu Pi, Yuanang had served a short stint as Chancellor of Chu, then retired to his hometown, Anling, somewhere in central China, where he spent his time attending cockfighting bouts and dog races, and associating with local mobsters. He remained a respected man, and from time to time Jingdi would write to him, asking for his advice on certain matters. This issue of whether Liu Wu should be named heir apparent was one such matter. Yuanang said it would be a bad idea, and advised Jingdi to follow the example set by his forefathers and pick one of his sons instead. It was probably a pretty good bit of advice. If Liu Wu had become emperor, many of the vassal kings would have been sons of Jingdi, who felt that they had been passed over, perhaps creating a similar sort of tension as had been felt by the sons of Liu Fei, the king of Qi. Apparently, Yuanang's word was enough to shatter the dreams of Liu Wu and Empress Dowager Dor. Jingdi declined to make his brother the heir, and disheartened and embittered, Liu Wu left Chang'an and returned to his own kingdom, Liang. Later in the year, in summer, the 4th month, Liu Che was appointed as heir apparent, as his mother and Liu Piao had hoped. The intrigue surrounding the deposition of Liu Rong and appointment of Liu Che is a bad reflection on Jingdi, not because of its direct outcome, but because of its fallout. Jingdi's indecisiveness in choosing an heir led to loyal and competent men being killed out of pettiness. Liu Wu, the king of Liang, blamed Yuanang for his being denied the position of heir apparent. In the second year of the Middle Period, 148 BC, in retaliation, he paid a group of assassins to kill the well-loved and respected man. When the murders were linked back to Liang, Jingdi was outraged and sent his envoys to investigate. At first, Liu Wu tried to deny everything and hid the men who had helped him arrange the assassination in the women's quarters of his palace. But soon his own chancellor and royal councillor came forward and admonished him. Unable to feign innocence any longer, Wu ordered the conspirators he was hiding to commit suicide, and he displayed their bodies in public. It was an effort to show repentance, but it did not save him from investigation. Empress Dowager Dor tried to intervene on Wu's behalf, pleading with Jingdi not to punish him. Jingdi faced a choice between applying the standards of the law or upsetting his family. Tian Shu, the man leading the investigation, advised Jingdi to take the latter option. He said, quote, "For your Majesty's sake, I beg you to inquire no further about the affair. If the affair is brought to light, your brother will have to be punished, or the laws of the dynasty will not be upheld. But if your brother is punished according to the law, then your mother, the Empress Dowager, would be so distressed that she could not eat or sleep, and this would cause your Majesty great worry, I fear." Jingdi followed the advice, and family loyalty trumped over a consistent approach to the law. The Confucian school of thought may have considered this a virtuous act, but from a legalist and probably more modern point of view, Jingdi's actions would be seen as a lapse in his duty as a ruler. As well as saving Liu Wu from punishment that he probably deserved, Empress Dowager Dor also used her influence to ruin Jingdi. She blamed him for the death of her grandson Liu Rong, and soon after that, managed to find some pretext to bring him before a trial. Jingdi was cowed by the wrath of the Empress Dowager, so Jingdi was convicted and forced to leave the capital. This is how he ended up serving as governor of Yanmen. However, Dor was not yet appeased. Once again, she accused him of something, and he had to face trial. Jingdi tried to convince his mother to let it go. He protested, quote, "Jingdi is a loyal subject. I would like to pardon him." However, the Empress countered, quote, "And the king of Linjiang, Liu Rong, was he not a loyal subject too?" Unwilling to disobey his mother's wishes, Jingdi went ahead and executed Jingdi. Considering that Ji was apparently a key influence deterring the Xiongnu from invading Yanmen, this strikes me as a particularly egregious example of putting family intrigue above the good of the empire. The other case of poor leadership that I mentioned had to do with the career of Zhou Yafu. After winning a lot of praise for his martial skill in the Revolt of the Seven Kingdoms, Zhou retained the position of Supreme Commander, and in 150 BC he was promoted to the highest position of government, that of Chancellor. This was the year in which Liu Rong was deposed, and Zhou Yafu advised Jingdi against the move, earning the Emperor's ire. Throughout his time as Chancellor, Zhou often objected to things that Jingdi wanted to do, usually for good reason. However, the Emperor wasn't very good at taking criticism. After Jingdi had taken Wang Ji as his Empress, Empress Dowager Dor wanted Jingdi to enfeoff Wang Ji's brother, Wang Xin, as a marquise. Jingdi was hesitant, and pointed out that Wendi had not enfeoffed any of Empress Dor's brothers in his lifetime. It was not until after Wendi's death that they had received marquisates. But Dor insisted, saying that one of her brothers had died before Wendi passed, thus missing out on a noble title. Surely Jingdi did not want to make his Empress's family suffer in the same way. Jingdi saw what she was getting at, but said that he would have to consult with the Chancellor. Zhou Yafu was quite against the idea, and appealed to an authority which demanded a higher order of filial obedience, the progenitor of the Han dynasty, Gaozu. He said, quote, "Emperor Gaozu made an agreement with his followers that no one who is not of the Liu family should be made a king, and no one who had not achieved some outstanding merit should be made a marquise. If anyone violated this agreement, the empire was to unite in attacking him. Now, although Wang Xin is the older brother of the Empress, he has won no particular merit. If he were made a marquise, it would be a violation of the agreement." The spectre of Empress Liu and her family haunted any discussion about promoting the relatives of an imperial consort. Jingdi could not come up with a counter-argument and was forced to give up the idea. Another incident occurred in the third year of the Middle Period, 147 BC, when 5 leaders of the Xiongnu defected to the Han. Jingdi wanted to enfeoff them as marquises, so as to encourage further defections. However, Zhou warned that it might instead encourage disloyalty in Jingdi's own ranks. He argued, quote, "These men have turned against their own sovereign and deserted to your majesty. If you honour them with the title of Marquis, then how can you blame your own subjects if they do not stick loyally to their posts?" Zhou Yafu's constant objections irritated Jingdi, and he cried, quote, "The opinions of the Chancellor are not worth listening to." He ignored Zhou's advice and enfeoffed the Xiongnu as marquises. In response, Zhou asked if he could resign, and he was removed from the position of Chancellor. However, Jingdi was still unhappy with Zhou, and wanted to ruin him completely. Shortly after losing the position of Chancellor, Zhou was invited to have dinner with the Emperor. When he arrived in the private apartment where they were to eat, Zhou found set before him a huge slab of meat, but no implements to cut it with. He ordered an attendant to bring him some chopsticks, but this was a bad move. It implied criticism of the Emperor's preparation. With a glib laugh, Jingdi asked, quote, "Is there something about the arrangements that does not meet your satisfaction?" Deeply disturbed, Zhou took off his hat and bowed. The Emperor ordered him to stand up, and he scurried out of the room. As he left, Jingdi watched after him and said, quote, "This ill-contented wretch will never do as a minister for my son, the young lord." With these words, Zhou's career was over, and Jingdi's other ministers understood that they should take any opportunity that presented itself to charge Zhou and bring him to trial. The opportunity came shortly after, when Zhou's son brought 500 sets of armour in preparation for his father's funeral, which was probably to Zhou's taste as a military man. We don't know exactly when Zhou was born, but, judging by the dates of the events in his biography, I'm a bit surprised that he was expecting to die soon. Maybe he was just forward-thinking. Zhou's son, in fact, bought the armour illegally from the government workshop, and when he refused to pay a labourer he had hired to help him, the labourer ratted him out. Except the labourer made the crime seem much bigger than it was. He accused Zhou Yafu and his son of stockpiling weapons in preparation for a revolt. By all accounts, this was not Zhou's intention, but the officials seized upon the opportunity and interrogated him. Knowing that the Emperor had it in for him, Zhou starved himself, and after 5 days, he spat blood and died. Jingdi abolished Zhou's marquisate so that his descendants could not inherit it. Sometime later, he also enfeoffed Wang Xin, the Empress's brother, whom Zhou had said should not be enfeoffed. Sima Qian concludes Zhou's biography by saying, quote, "In the use of arms, Zhou Yafu displayed a might and endurance which the famous general Rang Ju of old could hardly have surpassed. But he thought too well of himself and did not learn from the times. He was too unbending in the defence of his principles, until, in the end, alas, he found himself in serious difficulty." Sima had his hands behind his back when it came to criticising Han emperors, but this is as close as he could get to accusing Jingdi of making a mistake. Zhou Yafu's generalship had saved the empire, and as chancellor he had not been afraid to speak up when he thought Jingdi was making an error. But unfortunately for Zhou, Jingdi was not the humble, tolerant man that his father was, and instead of listening to criticism, he lashed out against it. This concludes our look at Jingdi's reign. At the start of what would be his final year on the throne, the curtains were lowered with some unusual astronomical events. Eclipses of the sun and moon appearing red for 5 days, the sun turning purple, and the planets appearing to move backwards in their courses. He died on the day Jiazi of the first month of the 3rd year of the latter period, the 9th of March 141 BC. Jingdi left a mixed legacy. He was often mentioned in the same breath as his father, Wendi, and credited with continuing the spirit of that liberal non-interventionist government, although Jingdi was usually considered the lesser of the two emperors. Ban Gu made the association in his conclusion on his chapter of Jingdi. It goes, quote, "The error of the Zhou and the Qin dynasties was that although the net of their laws was fine and their enactments severe, yet they could not overcome the ways of the wicked. When the Han dynasty arose, it swept away such vexations and harshness, and gave the common people repose and rest. Emperor Xiao Wen added the virtue of respectfulness and frugality, and Emperor Xiao Jing followed his practices. In the course of 50 or 60 years, the emperors even altered the people's customs and changed their usages, so that the many common people became pure and sincere. The Zhou dynasty talked about the kings Cheng and Kang. The Han dynasty speaks similarly of emperors Wen and Jing. How splendid." And it's true that on the policy front, we can't really accuse Jingdi of being a bad emperor. Aside from the revolt of the Seven Kingdoms, which was nevertheless dealt with effectively, his reign was generally disaster-free. While Sima Chen indirectly blamed him for provoking the revolt, as we said earlier, this may have been his intention all along, to deal with a looming threat sooner rather than later. I would also praise him for the measures he took against corruption in the judicial system and lowering the property requirement for serving in office, which to me seems to be his own pet project, rather than something he inherited from his father. And in managing the vassal kingdoms too, he used methods that were more forceful and unpalatable, but his reign really did seem to solve, for the remainder of Western Han, the problem of rebellious feudatories. I think though that the real black mark on Jingdi's reign was the way that he would let his personal base of feelings influence some of his decisions. Chao Tzuo, Zhou Yafu, and Jidu were punished despite their loyalty and competence because of petty private squabbles. Liu Wu got away with assassinating Yuanang, a respected man who had been a repository of decent advice since the reign of Wendi. And there were others, such as Duo Ying, who rose to prominence under the next emperor, who were simply passed over for promotion because they had disagreed with Jingdi on some matter or other. Translator of the Book of Han, Homer H. Dubs, blames this character flaw of Jingdi's on what he sees as unavoidable moral degeneracy. He says, quote, "Such incidents throw deep shadows upon Emperor Jing's reign. They seem quite inevitable when the ruler has grown up in the luxury and indulgence of the imperial harem." This is, of course, a bit of an old-fashioned view, and I certainly wouldn't say such a decline was inevitable. After all, the first emperor of Qin had been born with a silver spoon in his mouth and was extremely competent. Furthermore, the Han dynasty still had a few great emperors that would produce later down the line. Historian Hans Bielenstein also says that the idea of progressive moral degeneracy stems from underestimating how much traditional historians applied tropes to explain why dynasties rose and fell. Quote, "Dynasty founders who received the mandate of heaven are depicted by ancient historians as men of extraordinary ability, head and shoulders above their contemporaries. Those unworthy of the mandate are described as libertines. What might look like increasing degeneration of the rulers is rather the historiographical attempts to justify the coming and passing of the mandate of heaven." However, to throw the old theory a bone, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that being brought up in a sanctuary with your every need attended to could have a spoiled child effect on some individuals. Dubs does seem to have some sympathy for Jingdi, and I think we should as well. In any endeavour, it can be hard to ignore your personal feelings and do what duty demands. How much more when you're at the top of a system where your personal family life and your job are entwined at every level. When you're the ultimate authority on every aspect of government, it takes a certain level of heartlessness to sentence your younger brother to punishment, or to ignore the entreaties of your elderly mother, even if, from an outside perspective, it would be the right thing to do. I'd like to finish up with an apology to Empress Dao Dodor, the mother of Jingdi. Throughout this episode, she's probably come across in a bit of a negative light, using her influence over her son to push her personal feelings into matters of government. However, Dor is often credited with inspiring the positive policies of not just Jingdi's reign, but Wendi's as well. She had been born to a well-to-do family in Guanjin, a town in the kingdom of Zhao. As a girl, during the time of Empress Liu, she had been sent to Chang'an to work as a servant in the imperial palace. A few years later, the empress picked her amongst some of the other palace ladies to send as wives to various kings. Dor hoped to be sent to the king of Zhao so that she could be closer to her family, but unfortunately the eunuch she enlisted to make this desire known to Empress Liu forgot about it, and to her misery she was instead sent to the king of Dai, Liu Heng. Things weren't too bad though, because Liu Heng devoted himself to her, at least until she got old. His first wife had died, and Dor received the honoured position of his chief consort. She bore him 3 children, Liu Qi, Liu Piao, and Liu Wu, and when Heng became Emperor Wen, she became the empress. Now, Dor was a devotee of the Huanglao doctrine, which is usually considered a branch of Taoism, though historian Jun Shuzhang says it's more like an amalgam of previous schools of thought designed for the imperial age. He describes some of its key tenets. The state must be governed by written law, but this law must be subordinate to the higher moral principle of the Tao. The emperor is the absolute authority, but the best government uses a meritocratically selected bureaucracy. Ruling by moral persuasion is preferable to ruling by punishment. Aggressive, expansionistic wars are risky and should be avoided. Emperors should be open to criticism, and the natural world needs to be observed for signs which might communicate something about the political world. Daw insisted that Wendi and Jingdi study the texts of Wan Lao, and looking back on the episode and the previous one, you might be able to think of some ways in which their decisions and proclamations seem to reflect these tenets. This is where we get the idea of Empress Daw inspiring the lenient, non-interventionist government style of their reigns. Unfortunately, we aren't told of any examples of the two emperors consulting her on policy, so we don't really know whether her influence penetrated beyond instilling them with a philosophical framework. However, given the significant sway she seems to have exerted over Jingdi in particular, I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out she had helped him craft some of his policies. It's interesting to compare the treatment of Daw's male relatives with that of Empress Liu's. While Daw's brothers and parents received honours and gifts of land and money during the reign of Wendi, they were never as involved in the apparatus of government as Liu's family had been. The Lius had fought with Gaozu from the beginning, and several of them received marquisates from him. On the other hand, as we said before, Daw's brothers did not receive marquisates until Wendi died. Moreover, after the Liu clan disturbance, Zhou Bo and Guan Ying, who had been prominent in the coup and served respectively as Chancellor and Supreme Commander in the first years of Wendi's rule, insisted that Daw's brothers be tutored by good men who would teach them to be loyal to the Han dynasty. Thus, there was a lot of care taken to prevent history from repeating itself. Even after Wendi died, although some of her male relatives received marquisates, they still did not become significant political players. In fact, the most notable member of the Daw family, Daw Ying, was actively suppressed during the reign of Jingdi. He had served as Chancellor of Wu in the reign of Wendi, and during the revolt of the Seven Kingdoms, he was put in charge of the army that was sent to garrison Xinjiang. After the war, he and Zhou Yafu were considered the most prominent of all the marquises when it came to the discussions of court. In 143 BC, the Chancellor, Liu She, retired, and Empress Daw recommended Daw Ying as a suitable replacement. However, Jingdi wouldn't have it. Daw Ying was another of Jingdi's peeves, having criticised the emperor, both for considering naming Liu Wu his heir and for deposing Liu Rong. The idea that Empress Daw suggested Daw Ying is also a bit inconsistent. We are also told that she hated him for objecting to the nomination of Liu Wu. And furthermore, Daw Ying was a Confucian, in conflict with the Empress's Taoist leanings. Thus, the Daw family never came to be a fifth column within the Han government, as the Lius had. For this too, Empress Daw is usually praised by traditional authorities. Once again, thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying these, I'd appreciate reviews or feedback. You can review on iTunes, leave a rating. You can contact me at offspin-history@tudornoda.com or through the message box on my website, offspinhistory.wordpress.com. I'm not a historian and I don't speak Chinese. Just doing this for fun. And once again, I'd like to thank Professor Shui Shan Yu of Northeastern University for letting me use his music from the album The Vibrant Rhythm of Ancient Heroes.